Good morning. You're listening to Drinking Socially, the official Untappd podcast.
Your weekly look into what's happening in the Untappd community and the world of beer. This episode is brought to you by Untappd and the Untappd store. Use the coupon code PODCAST to get 20% off your next purchase.
I'm John, and in this episode, we're bringing Oktoberfest back to the States, and we're going to cover a Vienna Lager, which is like a cousin of the Marzen in our BJCP Style Guideline, and we're also going to talk about Beer 101 at the end of this episode. Cellaring and Lagering are the talking points as we near the end of the Beer 101 series on Drinking Socially. I can't wait to pull back some of the mystery around the Brite Tank, or really just make up for years of being afraid of the Cellar as a child. So hopefully Harrison can shed some light on the Cellar. But anyways, my amazing co-host Harrison is ready to go. He's got a beer. Harrison, what are we drinking on episode 21?
Yes, so today we're going to be enjoying Bell's Oktoberfest Beer. Which I'm excited to do. So there it is. John's popping the top as we speak. So from the brewery, the Bell's Brewery is making this beer. Obviously, it's a Marzen style beer, 5.5% ABV, and the notes on it from Bell's: crafted as a flavorful session beer. Bell's Oktoberfest is perfect for a week-long wedding celebration in Germany, or the start of a Michigan autumn. As with Bell's Lager beer, Oktoberfest spends a full 6 weeks maturing in the fermentation vessels, but unlike its cousin, Oktoberfest trades in the assertive hop presence for a focus on a light caramel note, lending body without too much sweetness. So, awesome beer. I love it. I try to grab it every year for a lot of reasons, but I'm going to open mine up. John's already done so, though. Have you gotten in there? Has the first sip already happened for you yet, or are you still smelling it?
Yeah, no, I took a dive right in. It's been one of those days, Harrison, where it's hard to believe drinking is part of what we do for this podcast. But it's also really exciting. I don't even know if that's going to make sense, but this beer, first sips, first pour. I mean, the head on this thing. If you're watching on YouTube, the head on this thing was amazing, like really crystal lace. And then so I dove right in, took a big sip. And it's, as Harrison kind of pointed out in the description from Bell's, I'm going to ride that wave and say that there's not usually a big hop presence in a Marzen, not one that I can pick up, but they're not lying. This beer traded any of that in, and it tastes like a caramel biscuit, a caramel cracker, but even there, it's really well balanced. It's like Oktoberfest light, and I don't say that is a drag. I think it's great because this beer's, I think, only available in 6-pack through Bell's, and this would be an easy one to get through before the end of work if you're really trying. What do you think, Harrison?
Yeah, my first sip, well, I get like biscuit all the way through. That's really what stands out. It is lighter in color than Spaten's from last episode, for sure. It's almost more fest beery in that regard than it is Marzen-y. If those are verbs now or whatever they are, I guess. But no, it's delicious. This is one of my favorite like college football beers. It really, I said it last week, I'll say it again though. With this one, actually, even more so. It's such a great beer for this time of year because it's crisp, so if it's still hot out and you're grilling something, this works. But if, the sun goes down, it gets a little bit cooler, and you're looking for something to reach that, is a little more complex, this also works. So it really is perfect for when it's released every year. And I got a 6-pack as soon as it came out, and this is, I think, my last bottle. So good thing I didn't stop myself on Saturday and went with something different.
Yeah, now that the show's on YouTube, it'd be incredibly hard to pretend to drink along, and I wouldn't want you to do that. I'm always grateful when we can put a beer on the show that's relatively widely available. Bell's distributes across the states and overseas. Although if you live in and around Germany, you're probably doing fine getting an Oktoberfest beer yourself.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you're probably knee deep in all the breweries we were talking about last week, with some fantastic Fest beer, Oktoberfest options. But yeah, this is one that is distributed all across Bell's footprint, and yeah, so hopefully you guys can grab some and drink along with us. Ooh la la, look at this guy. And yeah, I mean, so as John mentioned, we're doing another segment. You guys probably caught it last couple episodes where we highlight what the BJCP says for these styles, and just did a Marzen last week. So I thought we'd John wanted to focus on one of the cousins, a very similar style of beer to this. And really, actually, I've had beers that were called Marzens that I thought tasted like Vienna Lagers, which is what we're going to talk about. I've had Vienna Lagers that taste to me like Marzens. You could almost argue that there is sometimes almost no difference between the style. Maybe a little bit more bitter, but anyway, John has more information on it right now. So what did you kind of learn this week about the Vienna Lager and the Marzen and kind of how they relate to each other, John?
I wanted to say really quickly about some of that, I think, being marketing. If you want to sell more Pilsner, call it a dry hopped IPA Pilsner style. But yeah, a really good point. I think if you're just drinking a Vienna Lager next to a Marzen and neither of them are identified, it might be hard to really tell the difference unless that's what you do all day.
Yeah.
And if you do, let's work together.
Right.
But as you brought up, Harrison, this kind of using the BJCP as a guideline to kind of talk about beer styles, I think that's important to both of us with the hope of, educating a little bit ourselves sometimes when we're doing the research, and hopefully a little bit yourself when you're listening to it. The point about a Marzen and a Vienna Lager being similar, they're cousins, maybe literally, if beers could be cousins, but the BJCP puts Marzens in a category where it's an amber malty European lager, and Vienna lagers are in a category where it's amber bitter European lager. So not a huge difference in the categories of them. We're talking not even like the difference between a pizza and a calzone. It's like the difference between Brooklyn style and hand tossed.
There you go.
So the qualifications for a Vienna style lager, the real statistics are it has to sit between 18 and 30 IBUs, so not very bitter. There's an SRM that a BJCP judge will look at, which really is just kind of how dark the color is. And these particular Vienna lagers shouldn't be too dark. And an ABV, which alcohol, it should be between 4.7 and 5.5%, which is actually a little bit lower than some of the Marzens we've seen before as well.
Yep.
And then the kind of the overall tasting profile you want to experience when you're drinking a Vienna is you'll get a moderate strength amber lager, it falls right into that category. A little bit of bitterness, but it should finish a little bit more dry.
Mm-hmm.
And the malt flavor, if we look at this in comparison to the Marzen we drank, you're still going to get bready, toasty malt. You'll get maybe not as much of a hop presence in the Vienna Lager, but some of that's really subjective. Honestly, the descriptions in these styles are not interchangeable by rule, but really you could get the two confused. Sure. One of the firm rules was no specialty malts, no adjuncts, and I think that carries over to the Marzen as well. More of a traditional style. For those of you that love playing trivia games, this style was developed by a man named Anton Dreher in Vienna around the mid 1800s, and it became popular shortly after. It's the delicious beer style, and then kind of just faded into nothingness. It wasn't a really commercially popular beer style, the Vienna Lager. And one thing that craft beer can toot its own horn over is bringing this style back to the forefront. And just kind of letting people celebrate an easy drinking, slightly bittered, light amber lager. And I'm really grateful for it. There's some great commercial examples I'm sure, Harrison, do you have one off
Yeah,
the top of your head?
yeah. I mean, Sam Adams Lager, Boston Lager. I mean, that's kind of their whole story and a claim to fame of that beer. It, just as you said, John, this style was popular, then basically disappeared, and nobody made it until Jim and Boston Beer Co. decided to make their flagship this style. And now you see it often. I just had one from a local brewery, flying machine in town here called Benevolence that was amazing. And really, when I drank that beer, my first thought was, "Oh boy, I can't wait to have their Oktoberfest. Like it's gonna be, if they make this is their Vienna Lager, I can't wait to enjoy their Marzen." So again, similarities there, but the Boston Lager is probably the most well-known one, and that is definitely, even for the style, that's a little bit more bitter than you may find a lot of other amber lagers. That's kind of become like Boston Lager's take on the Vienna style lager. They're known for that as being a little more hop forward Vienna style lager, but as you said, it's in that category of amber bitter European beers. So I think it still falls probably close to that IBU range, but that's easily the most well-known one, and there's plenty that have seen the success and said, well, what's this amber lager? What's Vienna Lager all about? And it kind of jumped on board.
Totally. Another example that comes to mind for me was Devil's Backbone, aptly named Vienna Lager.
Sure.
And something I'd really be curious is to try. You know, you could drink 3 Vienna Lagers and you'll have 3 totally different beers depending on who made them, how old they are, where you got them. But a Vienna and a Marzen and like a Czech amber lager, which I would expect to maybe be on the other side where it is focusing on some hop bitterness.
Yeah.
That could be really fun to try. Maybe sometime on the show, maybe just drinking a beer.
Yeah, I like it. That's a good point. We could run through some kind of darker German lagers, move to Schwarzbiers and Dunkels, and really just get lost in the deep, dark, lovely world of dark lagers, dark German lagers. I could see that happening maybe in the winter sometime, some Doppelbocks, maybe an Eisbock finally, and really get wild.
Bring your
own
ice
pick.
Yep. The Eisbock and the Dunkelvoss twins.
Look out. But flipping back specifically to Bell's Oktoberfest, looking at it on Untappd, as we said, it's pretty well distributed. Currently, sitting at more than 103,000 total check-ins, and almost 3,000 this month. So it's as of recording. So this is it's time to shine. And we were seeing it kind of. I mean, it's mostly stateside, but all over the country. West Virginia, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, Pennsylvania. So it's getting some love everywhere Bell's is enjoyed. And when it comes to friends of mine that have had it, I've had it 2 times prior to this evening. And yeah, I mean, as of a couple minutes ago, see most recent check-in, actually let's start there, on Untappd, was Ben K. Had it a second ago, and seems to be enjoying it. A lot of people unlocking that Untappd at home badge, which I need to work on. But it's and then friends-wise, yeah, a lot of my friends have had this thing recently. Tom Crabtree enjoying it in a Bell's glass.
Yep, I saw that on Untappd. Right. That was really cool.
That's great. Doing it up. But yeah, I mean, again, this style is designed to be very approachable. Matthew Golden, he has a stein of it, and he's enjoying it, giving it a nice breakdown, a fine mouthfeel, enjoyable.
Matthew Golden's awesome. His Untappd check-ins, like he has kind of his own rating system built into it as well. I think that's cool as heck.
Yep, he's diving deep, which is great. That's very similar to what I used to do on Beer Advocate back in the day. Really, really get into it. And then for my own personal check-in, I had it just a couple weeks ago, and my really good 2 gulps. That was my comment. 2 gulps gone. So that was.
The Oktoberfest beers come in the same bottle as all the rest of them, but there are only 2 good gulps in that bottle.
I know. It's almost. I'm trying to stop myself. I don't know how it disappeared so fast. Yes, I do. It's delicious, and I'm
having a hard time trying to. I know we've got a couple of things to cover, but I'm having a hard time saving enough of this beer.
Right. And if you're big into cooking or just like doing it every once in a while or whatever, Bell's, they're awesome for the recipes, the clones of their beers. Kind of, it doesn't stop at the beer with them. It's a whole experience when you enjoy a Bell's beer. It can be if you want it to be. They have recipe for apple cake, or Apfelkuchen. I'm probably saying that wrong.
All right.
On their website that includes their Oktoberfest in the recipe. So if you're hungry for some seasonal apple cake, Bell's has got the hookup. And then Bell's has always been well known for having homebrew kits of their beers. So if you like what Bell's is doing, you can make it yourself. And they've also been very open and transparent about kind of what makes their beers great, which is really cool. And no exception here with the Oktoberfest. You can get an all-grain recipe kit right from Bell's and brew this exact beer. If you can't get Bell's Oktoberfest yourself in bottle, you can make it and have Bell's send you the ingredients right to your house. That's really
so
amazing.
Cool.
They did
you can
that,
make it Oktoberfest in December if you want.
Sure.
It should be a 6-month season.
Whatever. That's right.
It was actually
all year.
It was someone in the Facebook group that was
right.
just talking about how she had moved to, I think, literally a desert, but also kind of a craft beer desert. And we were talking about home brewing. That's really cool. Bell's is able to do that. We'll ship it to you. You can make it at home.
Right. That's right, which is great. It's a tricky style. I mean, it's not too tricky, but it's a lager, and they have great notes on their, when on the recipe and the instructions, kind of saying like this beer is a lager after fermentation, prior to packaging. This beer should be lagered. You do this by lowering the temperature to as close to freeze as you can get, and hold it at this temperature for 4 weeks if you can wait that long. And he says, and then package as normal. So
accurate.
Yeah, we'll dive a little more into that in a moment with Beer 101. So that's the trickiest part, right, about home brewing is waiting. But again, if you do, it's usually worth it.
And let's transition in here to some pretty big news from Untappd over the last couple of weeks, getting ready to celebrate the 10th anniversary almost a month from now. It's hard to believe Untappd 10 years old, right? How old, can I ask you how old your kids are on the air, Harrison?
Yeah, right. Not that old. They're what are they, 6 and 4? That's correct.
Perfect. They don't even know a world without Untappd.
That's right.
That's amazing.
That's all they know.
Any of you fortunate enough to have been married, for your 10-year anniversary gift is aluminum. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of fitting, and also it's great. Just a 4-pack of beers would be perfect for 10 years.
That's it.
So for Untappd celebration, well, we've kind of set out to make kind of a special beer, and the name of it I think is great. Becca, who helps us with the podcast, actually helped come up with it, called I Remember My First Check-In.
Perfect.
That's going to be the name of the beer. It'll be available hopefully anywhere. It's kind of a massive choose your own adventure for breweries. We're asking for a kettle sour, hopefully with local fruit. But there's a bunch of breweries. We've seen people from brewers from Russia. I think there's a meadery in Virginia that's going to try and make I remember my first check-in beer, in this case mead, or maybe even a braggot. U.S., U.K. brewers. There's Brazilian brewers. So the coolest part about this is the recipe is available online. We'll put links in the show notes. Just go to untappd.com/10, literally 10.
Yep.
For more details. But if you're a home brewer, grab the recipe, make your own. If you're not a home brewer, but you got a really cool brewer, near you, share the link with them. And this is everyone's opportunity to kind of drink the same beer with a local touch on it. And check it in. We're going to be promoting it. We're going to be spinning up a pretty cool live event where you get to see Harrison in another very Harrison suit. Mm-hmm. But I'm excited about it. I'm excited to see all the breweries that are participating. I want to put you on the spot before we jump into Beer 101, Good. Harrison.
Yep.
What brewery would you reach out to on Twitter and ask, hey, will you guys brew this beer? If you could influence any one of them.
Well, I think it's pretty wild that Dogfish Head is doing it. But man, so them aside, maybe Bell's. Why not? I think they do have a couple cool kind of fruited flamingo. There's a flamingo beer they do. There's what else do they do? But not tons
I'd
of
love to see them
sours.
do it with like some Valentine cherries or what
Right.
The Michigan cherries they get up.
Right. I was going to say. So that's what I was going to get at. Right? Is that Michigan is so well known for a lot of berries, whether it's cherries or cherries, strawberries, blueberries. So a lot of great fruit. That may still be coming fresh up off the vine now. So yeah, why not have Bell's just grab some of that fruit and sour it up? That'd be amazing.
Els, if you're listening, which hopefully you are,
Yeah.
because we're drinking your beer and it's you didn't ask for the feedback, but it's good. I'll drink Oktoberfest until next September.
Right.
If you're listening, we'd love it if you made that beer, share it with anybody that comes in asking for it. But let's get to the beer 101. This is going to be our 8th beer 101, which means we've got one more coming up, and then we're going to try and finish on the 10th episode in this series with something a little bit special. But where did we leave off last time, Harrison? Are we done yet?
Nope. The journey of this beer continues. It's kind of like that old Maid TV show from MTV where you follow some sad person trying to graduate high school or whatever. That was the one that happened in my hometown. Some like 6th-year senior, but this is different. This is not a person. This is the journey of the beer, and we left off with fermentation kind of bubbling along with promises of something happens next, and we're gonna dive into what that actually is right now.
Perfect. Okay, so the last episode where we focused on beer 101, we covered fermentation and yeast's job. We talked about yeast earlier, and then we kind of really dug in on what it's doing during fermentation. So
Right.
Here we are, Harrison. We've pitched our yeast. It's eating sugar. It's making beer. How do I know it's time to package? Is there a sign I look for? What's my next steps kind of after throwing the yeast in here?
Sure. And so the way most breweries work is that, there's basically 3 teams of people. There's the brewers, and their job is to actually make the beer, rather, make the wort and transfer that into the cellar. Then there's, we'll talk about a little bit today, the packaging team, which is in charge of actually filling cans and bottles and kegs with the beer. And in between the brewing team and the packaging team is the cellaring team, where a cellarman or a cellar woman is in charge of that beer after it is brewed and before it is packaged. So, and in charge of every kind of aspect of it. And at Neshaminy Creek, we all had to do everything. We kind of rotated on shifts every other month. We'd change teams, which is really cool. And it's actually very unique. Most breweries do not operate like that. You're hired as a cellarman or as a brewer or as a packaging or as, the quality control person. Neshaminy Creek was like, let's teach you everything, which I loved and I'm grateful for. So I got to be a cellarman a lot while I was there, and it was everything. It was checking the temperature of the beer. It was lowering the temperature or raising it if you needed to. It was dry hopping. It was dropping yeast and repitching yeast. It was cleaning tanks. It was taking samples of the beer. It's really like the job that it was always a great day to be a cellarman because you knew you were going to be busy. It was going to fly by because you'd walk in and it's literally a list of things to do, and they were all kind of fun, and they all took 20 to an hour and a half to do, so you kind of could move through them quickly, and then a new thing would kind of land on your plate, and you'd get to do that. So those are always really fun days to be in the brewery. But so this is happening. It's a cellarman or cellarwoman is in there. You have a sheet of targets you want to hit, of steps that this beer needs to progress through the cellar before it becomes packaged, numbers you want to hit, whether it's carbonation levels or its clarity or it's just how it tastes. We do like forced diacetyl tests, which is diacyl's a off flavor in beer, and you can test for the precursor of that, so the molecule that creates that off flavor. You can find it in a beer before it's even packaged. So you do all kinds of things like that, which is a lot of fun. But that's what's going on. It's not just sitting in these tanks bubbling along. Yes, that's happening, but in between all that, lots of measurements being taken, so that okay, perfect. Now it's time to kind of move this beer into that next place, whether it be the Brite Tank to be packaged, a lagering tank, maybe you're moving into some wood to age that beer. But it all kind of happens in the cellar before it goes to that second to last stop before it gets packaged.
Okay, so if I understand that, the cellarman is the coolest job at a brewery, or at least fun. I think that's really, and it's obvious in kind of talking to you through this Beer 101 that you weren't focusing on just one thing for your career. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to take advantage of all this. And hopefully it's fun to listen to. So we talked about the beer's fermenting. There's a cellar person who's keeping an eye on, we'll say, the stat sheet. And when it looks right, then it's time to move. And you mentioned two things that sometimes in my head, I can mix up interchangeably. You said the Brite Tank and the Lager Tank. So
Right.
let's start with the Brite Tank.
Sure.
Is there a specific role with that? What is a Brite Tank?
Yeah, so that's the last stop before, that's the vessel you're going to keg out of, bottle out of, or can out of. You can do that out of uni tanks, which are called universal tanks, short for universal tanks, which a lot of breweries have. That you ferment in it, you can lager in it, you can also transfer out of it and can and keg out of it. So that gives you some flexibility. But most breweries have Brite Tanks where their sole job is to transfer the beer there and carbonate it. That's really what the job of the Brite Tank is to carbonate that beer before it is packaged. You can also, though, add like a lot of flavors. Like a lot of breweries will add coffee at that point, or other really aromatic things to the beer. You don't have to, but it is a point you can add adjuncts if you like. If you want that adjunct to really fill the nose of that beer, doing it in the Brite Tank. It can work. Biofine too. That's an agent that breweries use to clear up beers that don't need to be hazy. So that's an option. It helps drop particulate matter out of suspension very fast. So before you package, you can do that. But really, it's where the beer is carbonated, and you kind of, in our brewery, we treated it like it was already packaged, meaning like you wanted that beer in that Brite Tank and out of it and packaged pretty much as quickly as you could logistically do it. Because at that point it's basically like a huge keg. You kind of want it in its final vessel as quickly as possible, so it can kind of move along. And really, so you can get that tank empty and fill it with another beer and package something else. Like it was always, if there was a bottleneck, it was always the Brite Tanks. And I think we added like 3 the time I was there, just to kind of keep up with demand, so you could always be carving something. Right,
it's not just like sitting in the Brite. We'll come back and get it tomorrow.
Really, it's like get it in there and carb it up, and while you're carbing it up, you prime the canning line, because we're going to can it as soon as it's at that carbonation level most of the time. That's so that's what the Brite Tank is. It really serves to carbonate, but it's that like last step before you get that in a bottle or some kind of package.
Okay, so honestly, great description of the cleanest sounding place in a brewery. The Brite Tank. So let's cover lager tanks. We're cellaring, we're lagering.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like I need a lager tank, but what do I get one for?
Sure, and you don't. You absolutely do not need one. There are a couple benefits to it, and really the biggest benefit is if you are a brewery that makes a lot of lagers, it's probably wise for just kind of like capacity reasons to have them, meaning if you put a beer in a tank and it sits there for a month, well, that means another beer can't be in that tank. So to have that fermenter be empty because that beer is in a lagering tank and a new beer can be added to that fermenter just gives you more cellar space. That was kind of also always a battle of a growing brewery is, we have this demand, we need this much beer in these many markets, we need to be moving through this stuff. So again, logistics kind of came into play there. We got 4 lagering tanks at once, and lagering tanks are horizontal fermenters basically. So if you imagine, if you've been in a brewery before, seen pictures or whatever, those large silver vessels, kind of like a stainless steel ice cream cone, where it's got a conical bottom and a kind of domed top where the beer is living. That's a traditional fermentation vessel. Just kind of flip that on its side, and you've got a lagering tank. And the reason for that, the reason it's on its side, is to help clear up that beer faster. If you imagine, a beer that you just sit in a fermentation vessel and say a 30 barrel fermentation vessel. So a fermentation vessel that can hold 60 kegs of beer is like 20 feet high. If that's got a lot of particulate matter in it, that matter's got to drop 20 feet or so, the stuff at the top, all the way to the bottom of that tank before it clears up. Where if you flip that tank on its side and now from the top to the bottom it's 5 feet and it's now 25 feet long, then it allows that matter to drop quickly from the top to the bottom, because now you've shrunk the bottom to just 5 feet. So that's a real reason for it. It frees up cellar space, but also helps that lager clear up much faster, because it's a much shorter trip for any kind of stuff you don't want in that beer and the final product to get it out of that tank, to clear it out before you can filter it or just transfer it into the Brite Tank at that point, which you would then keg and bottle and can from. So it
kind of makes me think of, I say my wife because she plays these cell phone games all the time, but I have before as well, like where you're managing the restaurant and you're serving your customers, and now you just opened up a new section of your restaurant and there's 20 extra customers. And
right.
I don't think this analogy is going to work, but it affords you as a business, as a brewery, the ability to kind of move beer into this holding pattern without slowing down your regular production.
Yep.
And real quick, you also mentioned earlier wood, and for me, that's a really exciting part in those beers that I tend to enjoy sometimes the most. I imagine putting your beer into a wooden barrel is less scientific, but what are how's wood come into play as you're kind of cellaring your beer?
Yeah, so what a lot of beer fans see is like this romantic part of brewing where it's barrel work and we're putting a stout in a barrel and slow-mo pictures of wood and barrels and...
You got it, yep.
Yeah, all that stuff. It is the worst. I mean, it's the worst part of the worst part of your job as a brewer is working with barrels. I mean, they leak. They're expensive. They're really extremely sensitive to like temperature changes. They can break. They can crack. They can get infected because they're porous. It's wood. So it's like all these different nightmares kind of coming together at any moment. They take a lot of work and a lot of water to clean. They're just kind of like these unpredictable things on many, many levels. So even transferring out of them, it was tough to get pressure and pump speeds correctly and filter screens, because a lot of the times we get fresh bourbon barrels that had chunks of wood in it. So you're trying to transfer a beer that doesn't have splinters,
someone's gonna get upset,
right? Right, but to do that, you have to have a filter screen that, if there's splinters in it, is going to get clogged by the splinters. So you got to stop and take it apart and re-sanitize everything and then put it back together and do it again. It really can become a horrible day where you walk in second shift and see all the barrels out and just one angry brewer sweating in the corner that hasn't had lunch yet, just kind of grumbling through it, hoping you're not, the cellarman on that day or assisting with the barrel master, because that's not a fun day to be in charge of cellar work, is when the barrels come out most of the time. So, that being said, obviously these beers are amazing to drink. It is kind of a labor of love, and hopefully knowing this, you can appreciate it more next time you have a barrel-aged imperial stout. Know that there was some guy who was angrily created this beer for you, but it had the best intentions, and that's why you do it. And don't walk out of the brewery and go, well, this is not for me. You know what you sign up for. Maybe not the first day, but after you do it once, you're like, got it. The barrel days are the days that I just need to prepare to be a little bit sore for the next week. But that's again, that's all part of it. They're amazing beers. Barrels are really cool. They're fun. They're tough to work with, but again, it's kind of like you get out what you put into it in some ways. Maybe not. Maybe you put into it a little more than you get out of it, but you do get some cool things. Whether it's wild ales or again, bourbon barrel aged stuff. There's some fascinating things you can do with wood, and beer. And so I look back on it fondly, even though I know in the moment a lot of those days are just me kind of like waiting to pull my hair out. But I didn't. Yeah,
I think that's some of the most rewarding work. You know, you got a tree to chop down, or maybe not jump to lumberjacking, but sometimes those jobs that are just really difficult when you begin are so rewarding when you're finally done.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, every time those days of bottling those beers were like it was a celebratory day in the brewery of like, as soon as we bottled them, people were opening them and drinking them and like,
oh yeah,
whew, we made it. Like for a while there, this could have ended up on the floor and nobody could have drank it, but it didn't. And it made it through and the barrel did what it was supposed to. And here we are enjoying it today. So those are some of my favorite releases. You're right, Tom. Like the final product, you can kind of taste the hard work in it, and know that like it was not easy wrangling that beer into the bottle from the barrel, and it definitely makes it taste that much better.
So we covered effectively how you know your beer's ready to move into packaging. We covered what the Brite Tank does, what the Lagering Tank does, and the fun of aging in wood. But I would tell you 1,000 times over that the end is worth the trouble. I haven't actually gone through the trouble though, so there's an asterisk. Before we wrap on the show, Harrison, I wanted to just try and take a second as we get closer to the end of season 3, and just kind of take a second. We've had a bunch of beers together, one really recently. And ask you just a question about you. And I know we're pushing time because we're doing these episodes weekly now, but if you can just give me a minute or whatever's natural. My question for you is, if you could live anywhere in the world, current time, where would you live?
Okay, current time. Right. When we've joked about, the mountaintop brewery that's hidden away from the world that you and I will one day have in a cave somewhere and not tell anyone about. And that's nice, and that will hopefully happen. But I've always been an island guy. Like, give me an island, and that's it. And right now, that may be exactly what I want: just a spear and a bunch of fish and an island with some trees on it and some source of fresh water. Like, it doesn't need to be any more specific than that. Maybe not in the path of most hurricanes, but I mean, I don't have much to lose there other than, I guess, myself. But I'll figure that out. No house to worry about getting blown down. I'm just living on the beach. But that's always been the goal, I guess, or whatever. I don't even want to call it a goal, but a funny thing I see myself thinking about from time to time, defaulting there, if you will, of basically just me, like Tom Hanks in Castaway, wearing some, beaten up t-shirt as pants and spearing some fish in a bay somewhere and doing that like forever. I'm cool with that.
Right. It sounds difficult, but it also sounds, that's your task for the day. I
was going to say, right.
Right. Catch a fish and your job is done. Don't catch a fish. And,
right. Your job's still done. You're just a little more hungry.
You're right. Thanks for sharing that with me though, Harrison. And I'm going to be envisioning living on an island with beer until we see you guys next week, where we're going to recap. The episode next week is all about dry hopping. Right, that's a little joke about double dry hop.
Yep, see what you did there.
We're going to be celebrating Bearded Iris from Nashville, Tennessee. Is bringing their beer out to North Carolina for distribution, and we're going to be drinking one of their very famous New England IPAs on the show next week. Thanks for listening through with us, Harrison. You want to finish it out?
Yeah, of course. And as a reminder, this episode was brought to you by Untappd and the Untappd store. Use the coupon code PODCAST to get 20% off your next purchase. That's the coupon code PODCAST. As always, show notes will be available at podcast.untappd.com. If you guys have any questions or feedback, please connect with Untappd on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find John and I on Twitter. You can find Drinking Socially on Twitter. We're at That Beer Podcast. Connect with us directly on Facebook at the Drinking Socially group. That's facebook.com/Drinking Socially. Other than that,
we'll see you next week. Prost.
Got him. You got me.
I jumped the gun. Good episode, Harrison.